Welcome to this week's edition of The Advance. I'm Kevin Roberts, your host. As you know, for the better part of the last 2 years, in each of these conversations, we try to find a leader either in the policy world or the academic world or in the business world who exemplifies what we're trying to achieve here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And it's true when I say that every single one of the guests I've had the privilege of interviewing has exemplified the American and Texan spirit. But it's also true when I say that today's guest may do so in a particularly powerful way. In fact, you're in for a real treat when it comes to energy. My good friend, New Texan, Peter Rex, who heads up Rex, a tech investment real estate firm based here in Texas now, is going to speak to us about why Texas, new tech here in Texas and elsewhere. He's got a special message for Texans, but most of all, we want to give you some insight, especially if you've been feeling a little bit of pessimism about the future of Texas or the future of the country, into the minds of one of the great patriots of our age. And I mean that when I say it. And so it's a great privilege for me to introduce Peter Rex. Pete, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks a lot, Kevin.
So high level question. We're just going to start with what's on your mind. And I think what's on your mind is kind of state of the country, state of Texas, which leads me to this question. You've uprooted not just your family, but all of the different aspects of your businesses and colleagues to Texas. Why?
So Kevin, the reason why we did that came down to that Texas has a lot of what we needed to be able to build a business long-term. And that includes a bedrock of faith, family, freedom, and the ability for us to leverage a culture that is rich and fierce as well. Texans are fierce, and they are about trying to protect these very sacred things. And that type of bedrock, that type of soil is critical for us to be able to succeed in building out what we want to build out in the long term, which is a new tech ecosystem as an alternative to Silicon Valley.
Yeah, that's excellent. For people who are tuning in from outside Texas, don't know that so much about Austin. Perhaps they know Austin might march the beat of a different drum than many spots in Texas. There are some great things about Austin, and one of them is what you just described, which is that it is already an alternative to Silicon Valley. And by that, I don't mean just in the business opportunity, but in the culture, right? That is to say that there's something about Texas culture and the entrepreneurial spirit here in the Austin area that's appealing. Why don't you sort of tease that out a little bit more for our guests who aren't as familiar with this culture as you and I are?
Yeah, so I mean, I think part of this is a historical phenomenon, and part of it's just a people action phenomenon. I think, in history, my theory on this, and history better than me, you got a Ph.D. here, so I'm going to be I got to be careful here in case I misspeak.
You're going to get
history. Oh, okay, yeah, great. But over history, we have a situation where Texas is very unique, where they actually had set up a different country at one point. And their people had been used to fighting for their survival, for their freedoms. And they brought that feeling, I think, with them into the Republic, into the American Republic when they joined. And they haven't lost it. And part of this is that I think they came to a land that really offered not much more than just land, right? And freedom and the ability for them to live out their values. And this spread throughout all of Texas. I've been to every part of Texas, really, which is probably different than most people have come here. So I made this decision to come to Texas with my family, with my company, very carefully, because we have a long-term vision. And my goal long-term is to build the largest enterprise ever built. But in the medium term, we want to create a new tech leadership. So I had to be and that's a huge undertaking. In order to do that, I really had to think through a lot of stuff. So I went throughout all of Texas, really try to get my grasp around everything. And I went throughout the United States. And in general, I've been throughout the world as well. So I've had a lot of inputs to make this decision. But here in Texas, a lot of things that people don't realize about Texas is the education system is excellent, and it's pervasive throughout all of Texas. That's a unique thing I think people are underestimating from the outside looking in. Also, there's an open-mindedness here towards the other, towards new people, towards helping other people as well. There's a high level of civic virtue throughout, and I think that could come from their Christian underpinnings or Christian roots. And these are all things that, and then there's an emphasis on faith, family, freedom, which faith and family, these are natural checks against big government, the encroaching big government, because they are little governments unto themselves, right? A well-run family is like a little government, and family is similar. And family is like that, but also faith organizations like churches, these are governments as well. They help to take care of a lot of human needs. Now that means that you don't need as much government, big government itself, right? When you have these institutions, they're natural checks against the government. And that's spread out through all of Texas. You also have an engineering culture. engineering culture was probably birthed out of the need, the necessity. Necessity breeds invention, right? And they needed to build roads throughout Texas. It's huge, man. When I got done with Texas, I was like, man, this place is massive. So it's huge, and it's also a place where, you know, they basically have invented fracking out of here and spread it throughout and capitalized on creating an independent ecosystem of energy for the country, which is huge in breaking the cartel that was holding us hostage as a country, right? And that was broken by the frackers, who are unsung heroes of doing that. And to me, that enabled us to pull out of a lot of the wars in the Middle East and things like that. But anyways, a lot of this is what Texas has to offer. It's also a huge state close to Mexico, which means that for trading purposes, that's a great place. Mexico is a huge economy, and you could do excellent manufacturing and trade with them. It's very central to the country. Anyways, I can keep going on, but I'm going to stop there. But you get the idea. I mean, basically, Texas is a special place. And the message I have, and one of the messages I have here for Texans, is that, you know, I'm a Texan now too. And my first Texan was born here. My daughter was born, about 8 months ago. And so she's the official real Texan born out of here. But I'm also, and I'm an adopted Texan, right? But I'm also proud to be here as well. But here as Texans, we're in a place where we have our freedoms being protected by a strong government, but that government has restraint naturally. And they don't, instead of becoming a demagogue, they actually want to be servants. That's unique with our current governor as well. But it's a history of that type of service. And to whom much is given, much is expected. And I think right now we have a situation in America where we see there's a lot of fires in the house, right? Well, we're in a place where, well, there's not much of a fire here, but it could come in. So we have a duty not only just to protect ourselves long-term, to get involved and to make sure that Texas, in a way, leads the way to help America to preserve its own liberties, which are still protected here in Texas. But it has a duty because it has a lot of things given to them here in Texas. We have energy independence. We have a lot of excellent things here in Texas, right? And that means too much is given, much is expected, and we've got to step up as a state to help out the rest of the country, as you yourself are doing as well in many ways. And TPPF is leading the way. Your whole team is amazing. So.
Well, thanks for that. And I'm really grateful, from one adopted Texan to another, to hear you, given the timeline of your arrival here, which is fairly recent, really endorse the spirit of Texas, perhaps better than a lot of native-born Texans do. And I say that not to be dismissive toward them. I think they'll get with the program. But the follow-up question there, Pete, is you brought over your colleagues, your employees, and to what extent, or I guess to what frequency, do you deliver that kind of message to them, that it isn't just about the really important work that you're doing, and we can get into that, but it's about really immersing themselves in the culture here? It's something that we see of your employees, not just here in downtown Austin, but all over Texas. Really curious about how those conversations are inside your company. Yeah, I mean, so Kevin, it's basically how I speak now is how I speak everywhere. I'm just being myself. I'm being real. I'm being authentic. And with our team here, one of the things that we are a little worried about, and that I want to make sure our leadership team is worried about, is we don't want Austin to go the way of San Francisco or Seattle, right? We left that stuff. And we feel a little bit like, if you've ever met Cuban people that left Castro's Cuba, those people and the next generation, their kids, are very vigilant and against authoritarian governments, against totalitarian regimes. And we don't want Texas, we don't want Austin as the capital of Texas. We don't want to go in the way of San Francisco and Seattle. We're kind of like these Cubans that left, and they are almost resentful towards Castro and Cuba. They don't want that happening here in this country. We're similar to that. I mean, I'm similar to that. And I think there's a lot of other people coming here that are of that same mindset. We've got to be vigilant here. And so your rights, once they're taken, they're hard to get back. We've got to make sure that this capital of Texas actually stays Texan and actually becomes more Texas. We have an internal saying, somewhat of a joke, because we do love Austin, but it's to make Austin Texas again. It makes me laugh. You and I were laughing about that a few months ago, and it's so true. In fact, some people ask me, well, Kevin, why in the world would you work in Austin? And I said, well, it's the state capital of the greatest state in the greatest country in the history of the world. And it is a great city. We have some challenges brought on by some really poor decisions by local officials, and nothing against them personally, but they made really bad decisions. It's an opportunity for us on the political side to make sure that voters remember that in the next cycle. But far more important than even the elections is that every day on the sidewalks, looking at Congress Avenue, where I am right now, or where you're seated, that we're interacting with one another that helps build that community, that helps build that culture, because otherwise Austin will go the way of San Francisco or Seattle. So to that point, you are setting up something along with some of your colleagues, what you call new tech leadership. You mentioned that phrase in the opening. And as I've gotten to know you a little bit over the last several months, I've come to understand what that is, but I'm sure that might be a little bit of a new phrase for our listeners, our viewers. So explain what new tech leadership is and explain why it's so important to the future of not just Texas, but of America.
Yeah, so Kevin, this is a tough concept. It's one that I want to make sure I can explain clearly to you, to the audience. It's one that I was, I've been immersed in it for a while because I was in the West Coast, right? I was in San Francisco, then Seattle. These are the tech powerhouses of the world by far, right? So I have a really in-depth understanding of this. And I noticed this problem intuitively, but then, what I'm trying to do right now is explain it to other people. We have a situation where we've got to create new tech leadership. And what I'm saying here is that we need to create a whole new ecosystem. We need to create an ecosystem kind of like we did in the Permian Basin. So people in Texas maybe understand what happened there. In the Permian Basin, Midland Basin, that area, Midland, Texas, they've created a whole new ecosystem that could rival what's going on with the oil cartels. And that allowed us to have energy independence as a country. Now, similarly, and that allowed us, I think it's correlated heavily with our ability to pull out of, wars in the Middle East, things like that, or just, getting involved in foreign entanglements and stuff like that. So, and I don't think it's too far to say that I think the British in World War I had similar concerns. That's why they kept involved out there, right? Following World War I to make sure that because the West relied upon oil. Similarly, right now, we rely upon technology as a country, especially for our public square, for the ability for us to communicate. Our public square happens like this over Zoom, right? It happens on phones. It's happening on Twitter, on Facebook, whatever, right? Now, we have a situation where the technology monopoly, and it's a monopoly not just on these forums, it's a monopoly on technology itself, is over there. It's in Seattle, San Francisco. Silicon Valley has a monopoly on tech. And most of the capital by far is coming into tech over there. We need to break that up. The way to do that is going to be a long-term solution. We can't go after linear strategies. Like, government is not the solution here. It's not the solution. It's a rear guard action. You've got to look at the whole funnel, right? You got to go way upstream. Well, at the furthest upstream of the corruption of our culture and the problems that we're having is these technologies they're controlling our public square, right? The business leaders, entrepreneurs behind this. And we need to create a whole new system of that. Now, as you go down, you have the media and stuff like that, and that's hugely important. Then you go, further down, you have the government, and that's very important. Now, I don't want to discourage people from getting involved in the government, but what I'm saying is that you can go and do all you want there, but if you don't control that upstream, it's going to keep coming down. We've got to go after technology leadership at the top, and we've got to recreate it out of Texas. That's a long-term build out. That's not an easy solution. The people that are preaching easy solutions, they're not liars, I'm saying, but they've got it wrong. Now, the two things I keep hearing that are completely wrong, Kevin, and this is important for our viewers to understand this, and I want Washington, D.C. to understand this as well, and our policy people in Texas to understand this here in Austin, is that the way to break this is to not create, government intervention. Maybe that needs to happen, but that's not going to solve it, because all you're going to do is block future entrepreneurs from coming in there and creating new technologies. The second thing people keep saying is we need new Facebook, we need new Twitter. So you have, Trump coming out with stuff like that, whatever. That's also not going to do it as well. Let's pretend that they could succeed. Well, then great, you have a Twitter and Facebook. Then what are you going to do when they deplatform you down to the metal, down to the servers? The servers now are run best, right, by server farms that then have application layers on top of them. Places like, companies like Amazon Web Services called AWS, or you have Azure, which is run by Microsoft. These places are all in Silicon Valley or Seattle, and that's where they're run best. So either you're going to then be forced to be deplatformed, or say they don't deplatform you, which they've already shown that they will. You could be kicked off the phones. There's two major phone systems. They're both coming out of Silicon Valley. It's Android controlled by Google and iPhone controlled by Apple. So you have a situation where our public square, which is actually more important than your right to vote. The public square is more important because in order to formulate where you're going to vote, you need to figure out how you're going to vote. You need to mobilize people. Now, when we broke free from the British, we knew that, right? So the first thing we put in, the First Amendment, was to restrain the government from blocking and messing with your free speech, right? And well, right now we have a situation where these people are messing with our free speech. They're messing with our ability to understand what is true, what is false, where do we stand? And they think they're arrogant enough to think they have a monopoly on truth. So they can do that. And they're tyrannical enough, given the power they have, to exploit people and to go ahead and do so. So that's my message. There's a lot to take in. But what I'm saying is the solution here is not linear. And the linear approach is like, it's like World War II. We've got to beat the Nazis, whatever. Oh, let's go after Berlin directly. No, that's not going to work. It's a fool's errand. It won't work. You've got to be you have to be a lot more strategic. And what I'm saying is strategic. But my solution that I'm proposing to build new tech leadership out of Texas, which I'm doing, and I'm putting everything on the line. And I need capital partners to come in that are aligned. I need talent that are elite to come in and help me. I need people like you to keep being in alliance with us, to help us to get this message out. And I need people that are listening to share this message. It's not that I do need capital people and I need alliances, right? I need aligned investors. But what I'm saying, my ask is share the message, spread the word here, because the solution I'm saying is the only one that actually makes sense. The other ones are all like easy fixes. Yeah, well, that's not going to solve it. So that's what I have. Let me go back to you, Kevin. Sorry.
No, man, I'm glad you gave me an extended response on that, because obviously you can explain new tech leadership better than I can. But what I've come to understand, just to underscore what you just said, two things for our audience. The first is what you just said is the solution. I think that there are some policy parts to this, but regarding all of our concerns about the power of big tech, a lot of that is nibbling around the edges. A lot of it also might make us feel good or make us think that we're actually fixing the problem, but we're only making it worse for the real solution. This is point two. The real solution is what you described, because the intentions of those attempts to rein in big tech are very good, whether they're coming from the left or the center or the right. They're very good. I understand where they're coming from. I share the frustrations, but the point is, we don't want to disallow the opportunity for entrepreneurs like you and entrepreneurs who come after you to develop, to innovate real solutions to it that are farther upstream. So spread the word if you're a member of the audience. Speaking of the audience, Pete, we're going to get to questions from them in just a minute. But I've got one more question for you, which I think underscores your courage. It underscores one thing you mean by new tech leadership. And what makes me think about this is an article, an op-ed you published in the Washington Examiner in the last week, entitled "Corporate America Has a Censorship Problem." Rather than my reading from this, I just want to ask you, what was the situation that prompted you to write this? What's the feedback you've gotten as a result of what you've stated?
So what prompted me to write this, Kevin, was that I saw that, well, first of all, reversing back, what set me in motion was Texas government put out the heartbeat bill, right? And I was very proud of that. And the reason why I was proud of that is because we're protecting, my pipeline, right? Pipeline of talent in Texas starts in the womb. And it was also a big step forward for mankind, for the West, right? We've had a history of drawing lines against who's human, who's not, based on skin pigment, now where you're located, whether you're in the womb or not. And seeing that Texas stood up very boldly there and courageously and pushed the ball forward, even if so slightly, they did so. It made me very proud. So I came out and I actually did a video of that where I said my support. Now, you'll notice I was the only tech leader that said anything positive. You had all these people line up that were saying, oh, we're going to move our people out of Texas, blah, blah, blah. I mean, come on, man. I mean, we can't have, anybody can work with me. If someone believes that people should be protected, human beings should be protected, babies should be protected in the womb, they can work with us. That means they're pro-life. They think what babies in the womb don't deserve protection. Well, they're pro-choice. Well, they can still work with me as well. I mean, I don't have a monopoly on truth. I have some things to learn as well. Everything's complex. Now, I'm going to say what I think is true, but I need to listen to the other side, right? So that set me in motion. But then I saw a CEO get basically pushed out and fired for his position. And that made me put this out that, look, they're not only censoring people, they're not only deplatforming people, they're exploiting people, the technology leadership. They're also going outside, and he did that in his personal capacity, by the way, not as a company leader. And they went after him personally, what he said personally, and said, hey, you can't even personally hold that position, or we're going to kick you out now. And they did kick him out. And the thing is, over 50% of Americans are also pro-life. So what does that say to the rest of the employees? What is this? I mean, what are we going to end up with here? We're going to end up with more and more corrupt technology leadership that doesn't allow the other side to even have a voice. So that's what got me out there to say something. And look, I think the answer to the cancel culture, to the cancer culture, really, because it's a cancer, is we need courage. Yeah. The other thing is we have to come at it, though, at the same time. We got to be tough, right? We got to be realistic. And we've also got to come at it with a culture of love, right? because they have a culture of hatred, and they're hating people, and they're not letting people have a voice. So we can't go their way of the hatred, right? We can't, like, I can't have a company where a leftist doesn't feel comfortable. I want them to come here and feel comfortable. Hey man, have your position, be Bernie Sanders, AOC, whatever. We love you still. Let's work together, and let's come across, and let's build great things for people. And that's the type of companies we need to have. And that's also the type of country we need to have as well, right? Is an open country where we can love other people despite having disagreements, because it's a bit of humility that we recognize we don't have the monopoly on truth. So that's what made me come out and say that. So.
Well, and both the op-ed, which we have posted, but we'll post again, as well as your explanation just now of it, I think really underscores something we've always tried to emphasize here at Texas Public Policy. And that is, when we're talking about reforming higher ed, when we're talking about fighting cancel culture, we're not looking for the state or some organization to sort of mandate the conservative dogma that everyone must believe. We just want civil society to include civil discourse, and that civil discourse is not unanimity of opinion. It's the opportunity for us to keep strong friendships, to develop strong friendships with people with whom we disagree, and to recognize at the end of the day that part of building a healthy community in the spirit of America and the spirit of Texas is to have all of those relationships. It's such a joy for us at TPPF to see a business leader like you saying what you said, not just because we happen to agree with you, but equally importantly, we agree with the approach you're taking inside your business. I just think that's the goal. So let me get to a couple audience questions, Pete. The first one comes from someone who asks, do you believe that Texas will totally outgrow and outperform Silicon Valley?
I think long-term, yes. And that is contingent upon human action. Human action's critical, right? We've got to have aligned investors step up. We've already had elite talent step up and join our company, and we're building out our ranks. And I put everything on the line as a company leader here, my money, everything, my family here. But we're moving, and we're making this happen. But we need aligned capital stepping up. We also need people like you to continue to step up with an alliance. We also need you not only to back people like me, but back others that are, what I'm saying is back people, not necessarily back me, but back others like me as well, that are also going to defend faith, family, freedom, because we need leaders that are going to be of that mentality here in Texas, building this out. And I think long-term, yes, we will win. My message ultimately here is one of hope, that we are going to succeed. And look, heaven is behind us. God is with us, right? But he depends on human action as well. God, and, I'm just bringing God up, whatever, but why not, right? I mean, that's what you said to be myself. I'm being myself. Look, God is behind us. But we have to step up, and we have to be benevolent. We have to be people of courage, and we've got to come in there, and we've got to build aggressively, but we've got to have real hope. And that's why I'm saying we need to build a new technology ecosystem out of here, not go after one-off solutions like a new Facebook or get the government involved, and that's going to save us. It's not going to save us. It's probably going to create more problems, right? Now, they can come in a limited way, and I agree with what you said there, Kevin. I think we fully agree here on this topic. We haven't talked about it fully, but we do. But the message here is one of hope, but it's real hope. It's grounded realism. It's not Pollyanna, oh, we're going to go do this. Let's skip through the fields. No way. We've got a huge problem here in Silicon Valley. And we're going to build out something that's much better and bigger and very different than them out of Texas. And we're going to succeed.
Well, obviously, we hope that you do, not just from the standpoint of financial success, but social and cultural success, kind of going back to this theme that's emerged in our give and take about the health of communities. So another question from the audience. They ask, Texans worry that with such awesome growth in business will come a leftist wave in our state. How can we encourage businesses to come here and thrive while still keeping Texas Texan?
Yeah, well, I don't see why being successful in business is going to be correlated at all with being, leftist or being radicalized left. That shouldn't be the case. And in fact, historically, I don't think it was the case. I think if you look at people like John D. Rockefeller, I mean, he was a devout Christian. He till his death, he always went to church, Baptist church, which wasn't the rich people. He always stuck with the poor people, right? That's because that's where he grew up. So I don't think that we need to go down that path where people who then become successful, these companies, go down the way of Silicon Valley. I think it's a unique situation we have right now. And historically, we've empowered them. We've trusted them. So we've given a lot of power over to them because they have been good stewards. Historically, in the last 10 to 20 years, no, they have not been. But if you look over the last 80 years, and Silicon Valley is a thing that took a long time to build up, right? You had the likes of Steve Jobs. You also had Bill Gates. They never came in and exploited people like this. They built great products that have changed the world, that we're riding on top of right now. We're having this Zoom call built on, I'm using an Apple computer, right? So we had these people who earned our trust. Now, this current cohort of leadership has become radicalized. They probably don't realize it as well. That's also important for people to realize. I don't think these people realize where they're at because they're in an echo chamber out there. So they probably think they're moderate. Yeah, they're moderate, amongst radicals, but they've come out of a university system that's radicalized them. And then they went to companies that further brainwashed them. And now they're around each other and they think they're in the middle. And then they become convinced of, these, evil people outside and they're acting on false information or false beliefs. They also don't have any principles really fundamentally. They don't have anything they can point to. So naturally they become victims of the zeitgeist and they get swept away with it. But anyways, these are longer threads, so I'll stop there on my answer. But
no, and I want to ask a bunch of follow-up questions because we're on the same wavelength. But in the interest of time, I won't. We can do a part two. And so there's some other questions from the audience, but I think I can sum them up with what is the usual final question from me, Pete. And I'll phrase it for you here momentarily. It's about optimism. But what I didn't tell you, which I decided I would spring on you, is that you're going to be, as it turns out, my last guest on the Advance before I head up in 5 weeks to lead the Heritage Foundation. Of course, I'll continue to be very involved here at TPPF, remaining on the board, et cetera. But I decided that just given the schedule ahead and given how much I knew I would enjoy this conversation, we would make today the last episode. We've got one more where I will be interviewed by my colleague, Josh Trevino, who's going to pick up the Advance and turn it into an even better show. All of that to say, no pressure. This is the last answer to this question I've been asking people for 2 years. In spite of all of the challenges facing Texas and America, why did you wake up optimistic about the future this morning?
Yeah, I mean, well, so I always wake up optimistic. So that's one thing. I'll say that right away. But I'll be very. I'll just come right off my gut, right? Why was I optimistic this morning? Well, I'm optimistic because, Jesus has saved us, because I know that there's an act of God that wants to preserve us and wants to see the best for us long term. I'm also optimistic because there's great people out there. There's that silent majority. Even when I talk about the evils and the bad stuff that tech leadership is doing, I also know that I was friends with a lot of people out in Silicon Valley and Seattle. The common person is disgusted with this stuff. Even in Seattle and San Francisco, they're like, what the heck is going on? They're like hostages out there, right? California is not filled with a bunch of enemies of America. They have a lot of patriots and veterans out there that are completely on our side, and they're being taken advantage of right now by a government that's become totalitarian. And I'm hopeful because the people are going to be the solution, and we're going to find a way or make one. We're going to figure this out. We're going to come forward, and we're going to, as always, the solution we might know, what it is through good thinking, but getting there is always our intuition and our gut and muddling our way forward, right? But we will succeed, and we're going to make it happen, and that's why I'm very optimistic. And it's been a series of and if we sit there on our hands though and we complain, we won't succeed. But we're not. We're going to do something, and we will succeed because we're going to do something.
That's the spirit of a new Texan. Peter Rex, my friend, great leader in this country in business and new tech leadership. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Kevin.
You're most welcome. And for all of you who've made this show possible, we'll tune in again. We'll give you the date on that interview of me by my friend and longtime colleague, Josh Trevino. Most of all, I hope what you've heard from Peter Rex is optimism and not the hollow optimism. That TPPF nor Peter believes in that kind of stuff. There are really good reasons to believe that we're winning. There are also really good reasons to understand that there are some challenges ahead, but that's always been the case for every generation of Americans. And so as we close today, great gratitude for all of you who will help Peter spread his message. You can find him on all of the various social media channels and follow his op-eds. And obviously, we rely on you to keep this country great. May the Lord prosper the work of your hands. Take care.